We appreciate your dedication to improving patient outcomes and the invaluable insights you share. Joining as our chairpersons for the panel discussion on neonatal sepsis, screening, diagnosis, mimics and stewardship are Dr. Pankaj Garg, Senior Consultant at Sri Gangaram Hospital, New Delhi, Dr. Pradeep Debeta, Professor Vardhman Mahavir Medical College in Safdarjung Hospital, New Delhi, Dr. Chinmay Chetan, Assistant Professor, Himalayan Institute of Medical Sciences, Dehradun, and Dr. Prince Parikh, Consultant Neonatologist, SKICC Medical College and Hospital, Faridabad. It's my immense pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Saurabh Datta. I request our chairpersons to introduce us to the notable achievements of Dr. Saurabh.
Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers, particularly Dr. Shaukat, for having invited us to conduct this panel discussion on an extremely important topic. You all know that I don't need to highlight the importance of neonatal sepsis. It's the bread and butter of neonatal practice. The statistics of neonatal sepsis, both in a public health setting as well as in a hospital setting, are so almost demoralizing and overwhelming in India that I don't need to really go over all the figures. I'm fortunate that I have four very eminent panelists, both from the public and the private sector, and they represent a blend of both maturity and youth and dynamism, and I'll just briefly introduce them. Dr. Pankaj Garg, you can just raise your hand and wave at the audience. He's a senior consultant in the Department of Neonatology, Sir Gangaram Hospital, Delhi. Dr. Prince Parikh, he is a neonatology super specialist at the SKICC Medical College and Hospital, Faridabad. We have Professor Pradeep Debeta, he is Professor of Pediatrics at the Vardhman Mahavir Medical College, Delhi. And last but not the least, the youngest of the panelists, Dr. Ashok Garg, who is an assistant professor in the Indira Gandhi Medical College, Shimla. He has just finished his DM neonatology from PGI and he will be joining IGMC Shimla very soon, where he was already working earlier. So I've already briefed about the importance of neonatal sepsis. It is one of those things that can spoil the gains that you make in many other fields of neonatology. I mean, you may be doing a great job with ventilation, great job with TPN and nutrition, but all that goes down the drain when the baby develops a severe episode of sepsis. And worse so when you have an outbreak of sepsis in your unit. Traditionally, they have always divided sepsis into early onset sepsis and late onset sepsis, according to the Western paradigm. And I think we all know that in India and developing countries, that distinction is not so clear. There's the blurring of the distinction between early and late onset sepsis, with a lot of the organisms causing early onset sepsis overlapping with that of late onset sepsis. And the risk factors for early onset sepsis in India are not always typically the ones that are described from the Western world. So with that, a discussion on neonatal sepsis, of course, could go on for 3 days non-stop and you would still not finish. So we've decided to focus on just 4 things. One is, how do you screen for neonatal sepsis, the diagnosis of neonatal sepsis, what are the conditions that mimic neonatal sepsis, and a little bit about antibiotic stewardship. And we'll try and wrap up in about 35 minutes or so that we gain a little bit of time, because we're running late in the program. So when we're talking about risk factors of neonatal sepsis, Dr. Pankaj, can you tell us what are the risk factors of neonatal sepsis in India as opposed to the West? And are there any systematic reviews on this topic? And all the panelists have prepared some slides for these pre-prepared questions, so we will also take the advantage of these slides.
Thank you so much, Dr. Saurabh, and thanks to organizers for getting me here on this important topic. I think before I start even the risk factors, I will say we, the healthcare workers, are the biggest risk factor for sepsis for any newborn who is admitted in the NICU. In my unit, we have a typical saying that the baby does not die in first 72 hours. If it dies within 72 hours, it is either extreme prematurity or some diaphragmatic hernia, some unmanageable congenital malformations. beyond 72 hours, a baby dies in an ICU, it's only because of sepsis. So actually, if you look at the risk factors, traditionally, they are divided into risk factors for early onset and late onset, and there are systematic reviews done in our country also. If you look at risk factors for early onset, means that the baby has come out from the mother's womb, and whether there are some risk factors which predisposes this baby. So now, NNF has done an excellent job of dividing these risk factors into two categories: red flag risk factors and yellow flag risk factors. Why it is so? Because red means more bright, more value to those red flag, and the diagnosis red flag is only two: foul smelling liquor, which is very obvious. Clinical diagnosis of chorioamnitis. Now, chorioamnitis is here clinical, where we are saying either fever of 39 degrees, which is 102.2 degree Fahrenheit, because obstetricians are more used to Fahrenheit, or 38 degree, at least on 2 occasions, 30 minutes apart. And also, it is not only fever, because only fever becomes as a yellow risk factor. With fever, there should also be one or more of the following things: basal fetal heart rate, that means baby has also to respond to that fever in the mother in form of tachycardia. And this tachycardia should not be a manifestation of the distress of the fetus, like accelerations or decelerations or beat-to-beat variability loss. It is only a tachycardia. Along with that, TLC, which is more than 15,000 in absence of corticosteroids, because you know corticosteroids can also impact TLC, and purulent discharge coming from os. So any fever plus any one of them or more is clinical chorioamnitis. And red flag, apart from this, is all smelling like that. Yellow flag are 4: preterm, premature rupture of membrane. Now every word has its value. Preterm means it is less than 37 weeks of completed gestation. Premature means the membranes have ruptured before the onset of labor. So it is preterm premature rupture of membrane of any duration, because then we presume the membranes have ruptured because of the infection process itself. Rupture of membranes beyond more than 18 hours, intrapartum fever of more than 38, which is 100.4 degree Fahrenheit, and dye handling. So 4 yellow risk factors and 2 red risk factors, and why we are dividing, we'll discuss that. Coming to the second part of the question, are there any systematic reviews in India? Fortunately, Dr. Murthy has done it, and thanks Dr. Saurabh for sharing this with us. That
This is Dr.
Murthy in 2019. So, male sex, outborn neonates, need for artificial ventilation, prematurity less than 37 weeks, and premature rupture of membranes. These are the risk factors which are found in Indian studies to be of significance as far as neonatal sepsis is concerned. As you can see, these risk factors are more important for most of them for late onset sepsis and early onset sepsis combined. So I will again re-emphasize the point that we as healthcare persons remain the most important risk factors. That means most of the neonatal sepsis is preventive.
Yeah, as you can see, like this list includes some things which are very typically Indian. You know, outborn neonates is something that you will probably not find as a risk factor being reported from the Western world. But you know, we know that when we are dealing with outborn neonates, you know, suddenly a threshold for suspecting sepsis goes up. Okay, now you know we keep talking about sepsis screens and the need to screen for neonatal sepsis. So before we delve into that, let's just get some terminology clear. I would request Dr. Pradeep. What are the differences between a screening test, a diagnostic test, and a prognostic test? Could you just educate us about that? And what are the properties that such tests should have, so that you know we look out for those properties when we are looking at these tests?
In our day-to-day practice, wherever there is risk factors, we used to do some tests to know whether sepsis is there or not in the newborn. So these are called screening tests to know whether it is present or not. And particularly, risk factors are there, but baby is asymptomatic. If symptoms are there, then again we do lab investigation rather than a screening. Okay. So screening in asymptomatic patient and having risk factors. And it's a good thing to do before starting antibiotics, because the babies are directly under our observation. But what should be the properties of a screen test? So obviously the sensitivity should be more, so that nobody having sepsis should be out from those tests, and should have maybe moderate specificity, but high negative predictive value, because The high negative predictive value means if it is negative, then we should almost rule out sepsis, isn't it? Which means we are screening the baby for sepsis. Now coming to diagnostic test. So after screening, we came to know that baby is having sepsis, is positive and like that. So we have to have a diagnostic test to confirm that there is sepsis. Okay? So in these patients, the patient may be symptomatic or screens are positive, and for diagnosis of specific diagnosis of the sepsis. So here the specificity should be very high, because once it is positive, that we should be almost sure that there is sepsis. And sensitivity may be moderate, may be high. High is good, and negative predictive value. That means if it is negative, then we should be almost sure that sepsis is not there, isn't it? Because we are now diagnosing whether the sepsis is there or not. So negative predictive value is very, very important. Prognostic test, taking some factors and all. After confirming the diagnosis of sepsis, maybe we can find out some prognostic factor towards to know the outcome of the babies having sepsis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pradeep. So now we are not going to focus so much in this panel discussion about the use of these tests as prognostic tests, but we are going to talk a little bit about screening and diagnosis. And I would request Dr. Prince Parikh to tell us that in the modern era, what are the components of a standard newborn sepsis screen? And when we are using it, are we really using it as a diagnostic test, or are we using it as a screening test? Because we need to get this clear.
Thank you, sir. Traditionally, we all know these are 5 common tests which we used to use, like total leukocyte count, less than 5,000, absolute neutrophil count, less than 1,800, micro ESR, more than 15 NNR, CRP, more than 10 milligram per liter, or immature to total neutrophil count, more than 0.2. So these sensitivity and specificity are also mentioned, and as we can see, all of them have a relatively good negative predictive value, and it's quite important also. But in of these, if 2 components are positive, then both the sensitivity and the negative predictive value rises further. For example, if any 2 components are positive, the sensitivity reaches almost 95 to 100%, and negative predictive value also approaches about 100%. But in the modern era, we usually do not do micro ESR, and even ITR and TLC also given less importance. But nowadays we give more importance to procalcitonin. We'll discuss more about this in the upcoming slides. And the second part of the question is, are we using it for the screening or for the diagnostic test? As you know, many of these babies are already symptomatic. So basically, these tests help us to making a diagnosis. It's helped us to just like confirming a diagnosis. We know the gold standard we have is a blood culture. But these tests help us to become more sure that yes, we are dealing with the sepsis. But yes, if we are doing it in the babies who are asymptomatic, and in those babies we are doing these tests, we can call it as a screening test.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Prince. And one must also remember that these predictive values, positive and negative predictive value, depends on the prevalence of the disease in your group of patients. So that means if you are expecting the prevalence to be very low, then that same test has a very high negative predictive value. Whereas in a situation where sepsis is rampant, that same test, even if it is negative, this negative predictive value will actually not be that low as reported in literature. So that is something to keep in mind, that if that particular baby, the baby in front of you, the probability of sepsis is very high, even if your CRP is negative, you cannot be absolutely sure that you've ruled out sepsis. And doing a CRP twice, about 12 to 24 hours apart, and both of them being negative, increases the negative predictive value of this test. Okay, now these are the laboratory tests. But are there any clinical scores or clinical biological scores that can help in the diagnosis of, let's start with early onset sepsis first, and then we'll go to late onset sepsis. So Dr. Ashok, can you help us with this thing, that are there any scores published which are known which can help guide the clinician to tell whether there is a diagnosis of early onset sepsis or not?
So, sir, it is very difficult to diagnose EONS at birth as the baby is born. So, we should have some risk factors according to which we can diagnose EONS. So, there are some scores and there are some recommendations from different societies. So first is there, that is the Kaiser Permanente score. It is a risk calculator basically, and it was designed in California. It included a larger cohort of infants, and it was published in many journals after that. So this score, there are like it takes into account the incidence of UNS at sepsis at some institute, then the gestational age of the infant, maternal temperature, and the rupture of membranes, and any intrapartum antibiotics whether the mother received or not. So according to this, it gives a risk that the baby will have, and then it tells us that whether we should give vehicle antibiotics or not. Then second is this the III, which is the intrauterine inflammation and infection. So it divides into three categories. One is the isolated maternal temperature, which is more than 39 degrees Celsius. And then the suspected III, which includes further more information like if there is any fetal tachycardia, maternal leukocytosis. And then the confirmed III, like we do the immunosynthesis, and then we isolate the organism and the histological correlations. Then we have nice guidelines from the UK itself, and which have risk factors divided into two: red flag and the other risk factors. And clinical indicators also include the red flag and the other clinical indicators. And the NNF-CTG guidelines we have as set by the previous speakers.
Could you give some idea of which are these red flags and the NICE guidelines? Could you just name maybe not all, just a few of them?
In the NICE guidelines, they divide into red flag and the risk factors. So in this also, they see that history of leaking PV, any foul smelling glycol, so these come under the red flag signs.
Yeah. And if they say if it's a twin pregnancy and the other twin is a confirmed sepsis, then automatically it's a red flag for the other twin. It doesn't have it's confirmed. Yeah, so there are a number of scores. Now the issue is that, as you can see, many of these scores are from the Western world. So the question is, are these criteria which have been derived from high-income countries, such as the Kaiser Permanente, which is from the US, or the NICE criteria from the UK, are they useful for the diagnosis of early onset neonatal sepsis in India? And is there any evidence to this effect? And Dr. Pankaj, could you throw some light on this?
I think first of all we should understand the organisms which are responsible